I've been asked to speak tonight about the model of Mother Mary, viewing femininity through a Christian lens. And I must say that this was a very intimidating topic to approach, and one that I certainly am taking with a lot of humility in just approaching the subject and just about talking, having this discussion tonight. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I do, so you have some kind of context for how I'm approaching this issue. I'm then going to go through several points, 3 key lessons that I believe that we can take away from the model of Mother Mary, and then really include some tangible takeaways about how we can actually take this insight and apply it to our everyday life. Does that sound good? All right. Then we'll have a discussion afterwards, which will be really awesome as well. So yes, that's me, and much like the introduction, I'm really proud to get a chance to work with youth. That's a large part of what I do. I speak at schools, I travel around talking about leadership, standing up against bullying, what it means to be a world changer, self-esteem, those sorts of issues. And while I was talking at schools, co-ed audiences, I began to notice a theme of girls in particular coming up and wanting to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation after my talks. And so if we go ahead to the next slide, you'll see these were some of the issues that the girls that I was speaking to would come up and talk to me about. Some girls would come up and talk about different eating disorders that they were experiencing, questions about how they fit in amongst their peers, worried about trying to be somebody else. You know, it says up there over 50% of all girls say they wish they were someone else. These are Canadian statistics as well. 14% of girls in grade 10 say that they're self-confident. You know, girls being on a diet in grade 6. These were some of the issues that started to come up again and again and again. And here I am trying to have a conversation about what it means to be a leader and what it means to be a world changer. And it was like I couldn't even get to the point of that aspect because there were all these other sort of barriers that were clearly in the way of girls kind of recognizing their full potential and feeling inspired to actually rise up and make their mark on the world. So much like the next biblical verse here, what our goal is with Girl Talk Empowerment is to really encourage girls ages 11 to 18 to recognize that they have huge potential to make an impact on the world, and to get them to see that their worth and that their value goes far beyond appearance and much more about who they are as a person and what they have to offer the world. So we talk about self-esteem, body image, mental health, global citizenship. These are sort of the themes that are repeated. Workshops, keynote speeches. We run a big event in Toronto at the Metro Toronto Convention Center coming up in June. We get 1,200 girls there for an awesome day filled with inspiration. We have school chapters all across Ontario. We have a few in the States, and we just opened a chapter in Uganda, which was super exciting as well. I was Skyping with them earlier this week, and they found us on Google, of all places. And it's a Christian organization that founded this school, so they're actually doing some incredible work there under this Girl Talk name. So that's sort of to paint a picture of what this looks like. And yes, we can go ahead to the next picture, where you see a little bit more about some of the spirit from our Girl Talk Day event. This is what the girls look like. They bring their signs, they bring their energy, talking all about how they'll make their mark this year. So, when I talk about girl empowerment, when people hear that term, when I'm going somewhere to speak, people might not think that what I'm talking about, what I'm actually talking about, all those things that I just told you about, is what I'm speaking about. They might think something like this. Now, we are in an interesting period of time, which is why I think having this discussion tonight is so important. We are in a real interesting period where women's issues are front and center. They are, you know, populating what we see in the media. They're at the top of our social media feeds. These are in popular discourse. Like this is what is being discussed. Feminism, big word. 10 ways to have an awkward dinner party. You guys bring up the word feminism, right? Like it gets awkward real quick. You know, talk about women empowerment, talking about these issues. It creates a real divide. It creates emotion. It gets people riled up. Like, these are some serious, serious issues. And then we can go even further into #MeToo and Time's Up and what all that means. somewhere, amidst all of these different ideas and arguments about what it means to be a woman in today's world, but more importantly, what does it mean to be a Christian woman in today's world? What does that actually look like? And how do we sort of reconcile all these different ideas and thoughts and viewpoints, and how do we sort of find our own way of moving forward and living? How do we look at someone like Jesus? How do we look at someone like Mother Mary? And how do we kind of figure out a framework for our life moving forward? So that is sort of what we're aiming to look at tonight. Mother Mary here, there's many things. Doing some research for this talk, obviously we have the faith-based stuff that comes up front and center on Google, but not too far after, you can really find some different opinions about what Mary represents. People arguing that she's not a positive role model for women, arguing that she's not a symbol of women's empowerment, and so many other different arguments in between. And so one of the times where I first started speaking about this was a few years back. I often get a chance to be a guest contributor to a number of media outlets, including News Talk 1010, which is great because the host on this station that I was on was a conservative, so it was a good start. And we did a talk on why feminism desperately needs a makeover, and I did this on International Women's Day. And this was kind of the first point where I really started to challenge this idea of feminism. And to me, it's been a word that I've had a really hard time identifying with, which is kind of funny, because I think the work that I'm doing would be something that people would say, well, yeah, you must be a feminist. But what I argued sort of in this talk was, I think feminism today has really become something, a term, a buzzword that's kind of been hijacked to mean a particular set of political beliefs and values that lean a certain way, and heaven forbid if you try and challenge them. Heaven forbid if you actually come back with a thoughtful question, or you come back with something related to your Christian lens or viewpoint. You will be, as I have been, pushed aside. I've had some really aggressive comments online on some of my posts, particularly this video, of people challenging this idea that I'm not actually a feminist and I'm actually setting women back by hundreds of years. So these are the sorts of conversations that surround what we're talking about tonight. Now to quote St. Augustine, and the world being unworthy to receive the Son of God directly from the hands of the Father, he gave his Son to Mary for the world to receive him from her. So somewhere in that cloud of feminism and all those debates, we turn our eyes to Mary. And my goodness, what a contrast. What a massive, massive contrast. And when I started to think about just the role of Mary and the role that she plays in the Christian story, it is just so significant. God could have chosen to have Jesus enter the world in a million different ways. Right, a million different ways. It could have been something extremely dramatic. It could have been, coming right from the sky down and, here he is. It could have been so many different ways to enter the world. But he chose to have him enter the world, the Son of God, to enter the world as a baby, a defenseless baby, through a woman. And what can be learned from Mary? So there's lots that can be learned from Mary. I'm just scratching the surface tonight. I want to have more discussion with you. I know we've got some discussion questions afterwards where we'll be able to dive into it a little bit further, but these are 3 points that I really want to highlight for you tonight about what can be learned from Mary. So number 1 is selfless giving and love is what is asked of us. I think that's one big lesson to take away. 2 is all about motherhood and the role of family and how it should be celebrated. And 3 is about obeying God's command for our life, because I believe that is the key to living with purpose. So number 1, selfless giving and love. There's many different Bible verses that I've kind of put up on the screen while I'm talking. I'm going to highlight a few pieces as we go. But essentially, let's start right from the beginning. The central point that many people, even if you're not a Christian, would probably know about the faith, which is the moment where the angel appears and talks to Mary and presents to her this incredible news that she is going to give birth to the Son of God. And so this point is all about selfless giving and love, and to me what stands out right away is Mary's response to such a remarkable ask. And it is this: I am the Lord's servant, may your word to me be fulfilled. Wow. I'm trying to imagine that kind of selfless love, that kind of giving of oneself, if such a request was asked of someone like myself. We'll go ahead to the next slide there. So that example, and we take a look at a few different bullet points here of what we can sort of take away and what we can piece away from all of this. We're talking about putting the well-being of others before ourselves. That's kind of the basic definition of what it means to be selfless. And asking not what's in it for me, but instead what's in it for God. Guys, I believe we are living in a generation, in a time period where it's very much me-centered, me-focused. What's the best outcome for myself in all of these situations? That tends to be what we hear and what we think and what is repeated again and again and again. But if we look to Mary, if we look to her response, we see something very different. It's not about what she thinks is the right plan. It's about what's in it for God. It's what is his calling for her life. And being willing to sacrifice our reputation. Like, just to put it in context, here we have Mary as a 13-year-old girl, right? Unmarried, poor, having such a request asked of her. Like, when you feel like maybe you don't have a lot to give, she's being asked to give in the most powerful of ways. So very much in contrast, just from point number one, from today's me-focused society, and especially when it comes to looking at femininity, this stands in stark contrast. I also think about this from a personal perspective, because one of the organizations that I've done some work with in my community, I'm from Whitby, we have a shelter nearby called Wings Maternity Home, and they do a lot of work supporting teen moms and pregnant teens. And I look at these girls today, and they're not the people who our world puts up. They're not the people who are celebrated necessarily for their life and where they are. Many of them find themselves abandoned by their families and cast aside, or come from really terrible circumstances, and here they are, they found themselves in, thank goodness, a beautiful home like this with love and care and connections to schooling while they're pregnant or while they give birth. And it's amazing to me to think that these people who maybe aren't recognized as empowered, amazing, godly, necessarily individuals, how much they are when we look at Mary. How much they are when we think about what kind of selflessness that takes, because today we are faced with a very different sort of situation than Mary would have faced. Today there's this moral choice dilemma that sort of surrounds the conversation and surrounds the discussion. Today there's things like people looking at themselves and going, well, there's financial challenges, there's personal challenges, there's stigma. And I have the ability in Canada, I have the ability where I could attempt to make a choice for my life that could change the plan that God has. What a difference. And for these young women, which is why I'm so passionate about working with them and celebrating them, teens, teen moms who are choosing the selfless act of following through with God's plan for their life. How's this for a light discussion so far, everybody? Really good, yeah. Just the Raptors of this, yeah, good choice, okay. Number two, all right, motherhood and family. So, we don't actually see too much of Mary in terms of quotes that we can really piece apart in the Bible. We really don't. There's several that really stand out and maybe come to front of mind, but there's certain themes that you can kind of see emerging. And one of those being, I have another passage up here, one of those being this particular line that stands out to me, but Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. There's several mentions of Mary pondering, of her thinking, of her wrestling with different spiritual Christian issues before she sort of makes a decision and moves forward with them. And I think that's really important when we talk about motherhood and family, because this is the next part of the conversation here. Recognizing the sanctity of life and a woman's vital role in reproduction. And I argued this a lot more, so if you're interested, you can listen to that 10-10 talk, but I really kind of hit home on this point about fighting against the idea that we shouldn't argue that men and women have the exact same roles in life. And I talk about it in a lot more detail, but here, just very, very simply, the idea that this Mother Mary is such a plays such a vital role in bringing the Son of God into the world. Motherhood is a unique model of strength that is interdependent. And to go back to that example that I was giving you of the pregnant teens today, that's interesting, right? Because I think if you were to ask a room full of secular people what they think a strong woman looks like, I think that they might say something different. I think that they might say that that woman is very independent, right? She's somebody who goes and does things for herself, and she's out there and she's conquering and she's doing all this. But motherhood is about interdependence, and motherhood is about really caring for those around you. It's a lot more giving than sort of the other definition. And I can speak to this on a personal note because I think my mom, to me, was a real example and a hero of what I think it means to be a strong mother. She was somebody who had lots of career opportunities growing up. She was in the hairstyling field, and she was working her way up at L'Oreal, and she had an opportunity to become a platform artist, which basically means that all these big road shows that they do at convention centers, she was actually the one on stage getting to speak and do the live demonstrations. They wanted her to start traveling around more and more and more, but she met my dad, and after they got married, she became pregnant. And she had this decision sort of to make for her life about, was she going to continue through the career path? What was that going to look like? And my mom, in discussion with my dad, chose to actually give up all of her career endeavors and chose to be a stay-at-home mom. And she raised me, my brother, and my sister for 20 years. She stayed home, and she is now back into the workforce. She's like a public figure, political figure. She's a trustee for a school board and a supervisor at the YMCA, and she has like a second-degree black belt and all these other amazing things. So a real example to me of a strong woman, but I just looked at her at that choice that she made, and she shared with me some of the judgments that came her way for choosing to be a stay-at-home mom. It wasn't something that was just an easily accepted choice by everyone. There were a lot of challenges, people questioning her. She was giving up her life, She was doing all these things, like why would you ever give up these career opportunities? And I just think in a society that only is now currently, I believe, celebrating that independent, career-focused woman as a model of true femininity and a model of what it means to be a strong woman, I believe that we also need to celebrate mothers. And we also need to take time to recognize the strength that they have and that choice that they make in doing so, and maybe even being, if they'd like to, a full-time mom. Now, the other interesting point when it comes to Mary is that motherhood is an example of a long-term sacrifice and commitment that is not glamorous but deeply important. This is kind of an interesting note to think about too, right? God didn't just ask Mary to do one little simple task, right? Like go here and come back. No. Mary had the long haul task. Mary had the task that was not just going to be, okay, it's all over and done. It was going to be something that was going to fill up the rest of her life, which is what motherhood does. It's a long-term commitment, and it's not glamorous. It's those little day-to-day, behind-the-scenes moments that we don't see that are the most powerful part of this sort of ministry, right? And imagine raising the Son of God. Like, we don't really talk about that, right? We don't really think about that. Like, could you imagine that whole process behind the scenes at home, taking care of them and making sure everything's okay? Like, all of that are these sort of selfless acts behind the scenes and are a symbol of motherhood, and it reminds us that motherhood is a very holy task. All right. Obeying God's command is the third point that I wanted to highlight, the third point that I wanted to make. And this particular passage stood out to me As Jesus was saying these things, he was giving his talk and he was preaching, a woman in the crowd called out, "Blessed is the mother who gave you birth and nursed you." And Jesus replied, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it." So I thought this was an important point to follow up with, because while I am definitely making the case and claim about how important motherhood is and how it should absolutely be celebrated, I think that particular verse that we just looked at also says something else. It also says that you can be holy and godly regardless of what your vocation is. You can be holy and godly even if that is not the path that God has for your life as a female. You know, femininity can mean many things. It can mean being a mother. It can mean being single. It can mean ministry in the church. There's so many different ideas of what it can mean, and those should all be valued, welcomed, accepted. And so takeaways from Mary's example: be willing to drop your plans to follow the one that God has called you to, right? Can you believe that? Like, I try and imagine myself in some of these different circumstances and stories, and just imagine, like, what would I do? How would I respond? And I think sometimes this is more of a challenge that we wrestle with than we might think. Not being afraid to stand out or to be criticized. So many times in the course of doing the work that I'm doing, it's now to the point where we have some pretty major sponsors, major companies supporting Girl Talk Empowerment, supporting me, supporting my work as a speaker and traveling around. And there's been moments where I have wrestled with this idea of, okay, as soon as I start to speak out on some of these issues, there's a real strong chance that I might lose some of these connections that we have. And that's just my personal example and story of sort of not being afraid and being in a supportive community so that you can stand out, stand up for what you believe in, and have the courage to do so, because that's what we're called to do. And then, yes, my last point, finding your path, right? Femininity can mean many things, but finding your path through reflection and prayer, and I think that's the most important part of all of this is, I'm a big believer, and maybe it's part of this whole non-denominational Christian thing, but we are very much about personal relationship with God and taking time for self-reflection, taking time for prayer, taking time to really consider the opportunities before us and asking yourself, like, which one of these, God, like, which one of these plans that you sort of placed before me, or opportunities, are the ones that, or the one that you'd like me to take? And what are my gifts? Like, what are my talents and what are my spiritual gifts that I have to offer the world, and what is the best way that I can possibly utilize these gifts that you've given to me? And so, to sort of wrap up the discussion for today, I was really struck by this quote as I was sort of preparing for the talk, and it says, it's by Elizabeth Elliot, and she says, "By trying to grab fulfillment everywhere, we find it nowhere." We are in a time period where I think we could maybe say that the average young person is more spiritual than ever before. We see people searching for fulfillment in so many different ways, right? The New Age movement has really come into the picture. Crystals, angel cards. Then we also have, you know, the horoscope sort of section and movement, and then we have on top of that, maybe people were seeking fulfillment in many other areas. You know, we're now in a bit of a hookup culture. It's just go with anybody at any time. It's Tinder world. It's all these different things. People are seeking some sort of transcendence. They are seeking some sort of meaning for their life and looking for it in so many different ways. But I think when we look at the example set by Mother Mary, it really illuminates sort of the approach that all of us should take, which is to trust and to have faith in God above everything else. Because by trying to grab fulfillment everywhere, here, there, everywhere, and listening to every other person's viewpoint, and not actually turning to Scripture, and not actually turning to what are we called to do as Christians, we're not going to know where to turn, right? We're not going to know. How do we make these very difficult decisions that we face in life, and we all face them in different ways? How are we actually going to do that if we're just listening to any random piece of advice or the current trend? We always have to challenge ourselves to go back to the root, to go back to the Word, to root ourselves in these key messages and spiritual elements. And Mary, above all things, whatever she faced in her life, and I only scratched the surface, right, of telling her story, right from the Immaculate Conception, but her life was filled with many challenges beyond that. And she always knew that it was going to be okay. She always had faith. She always thought and pondered and wrestled with different issues, right? Like if you notice in the scripture, she doesn't actually just right away say, yeah, I'm good with this whole thing going forward. She actually takes a moment to ask a question, right? She's thoughtful, she ponders, she considers, and then she follows and obeys the command of God, which I think is just such a powerful model for all of us to take. Thank you very much.